The December air in Sao Paulo bit through silk like razors as I stood in the shadowed corridor of the Salazar compound, my wedding gown heavy against my skin. 24 years old, and this was meant to be the moment everything changed. Instead, my fingers dug into the beaded fabric at my waist, my pulse loud in my ears as voices carried from the mahogany doors just ahead. I hadn't intended to listen. I'd been looking for my mother, lost in this fortress of marble and armed men that would become my cage by morning. But when I heard Aguero's voice, cold, detached, final, I stopped breathing. I never wanted her. She's nothing but a contract. The words didn't just wound me, they carved through bone. I pressed myself against the wall, the intricate lace of my veil catching on the stone. My heart hammered so violently I thought they'd hear it through the doors. The diamond tiara my mother had fastened into my hair hours ago now felt like a crown of thorns. Then why marry her at all, Jefe? That was Romero, Aguero's second-in-command, the man who delivered the marriage papers to my father's study 6 weeks ago like it was a trade agreement, which I suppose it was. Because her family controls the port access we need, Aguero answered, his tone flat, businesslike. The Torres name opens doors. That's all she is. A key. My knees nearly buckled. A key. Not a woman, not a partner, not even a person worth pretending to care about. Just a tool, a transaction, a means to expand his empire. I should have walked away, should have run back to my room, torn off this dress, and refused to go through with it. But my father's voice echoed in my head from the night he signed the contract. This is bigger than you, Mabel. This is survival, for all of us. So I stood there, frozen, as the man I was about to vow my life to dismantled any illusion I'd foolishly clung to. She'll do what she's told, Aguero continued. That's all I need from her. Compliance, silence, nothing more. I closed my eyes, swallowing the scream building in my throat. Tomorrow morning, I would walk down that aisle. I would say the words. I would wear his ring. But I would never forget this moment. I would never forget that to Aguero Salazar, the most feared man in Sao Paulo, I was nothing. What I didn't know then, what neither of us could have predicted, was that the woman he dismissed as nothing but a contract would one day become the only thing standing between him and total destruction, that the bride he rejected would transform into the queen he couldn't survive without, and that the man who swore he never wanted me would eventually burn his entire empire to the ground just to keep me alive. This is the story of how a loveless arrangement became a battle for survival, of how rejection forged a woman into a weapon, and of how the Mafia king who thought he needed no one discovered too late that the only person who could save him was the one he'd already thrown away. The ceremony lasted 17 minutes. I know because I counted every second, watching the grandfather clock in the corner of the chapel as Father Domingos spoke words I couldn't hear over the roaring in my ears. Aguero stood beside me in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my father's car, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed somewhere beyond the stained glass windows. He never looked at me, not once. When it came time for the vows, his voice was mechanical, flat, like he was reading terms and conditions on a contract he hadn't bothered to review. I do. 2 words. That was all I got. I whispered mine back, my throat so tight I barely recognized my own voice. The ring he slid onto my finger was platinum and cold. He released my hand the moment it was done, stepping back like I might be contagious. There was no kiss. Father Domingos had tried to prompt him, but Aguero simply turned and walked down the aisle, leaving me standing there in my $1,000 gown, alone. The reception was worse. 200 guests filled the Salazar Estates ballroom, crystal chandeliers casting golden light over tables laden with champagne and caviar. They toasted to our union, to power, to legacy. Aguero sat at the head table, speaking in low tones to Romero and the other men who ran his operations. I sat 3 feet away, smiling when required, my face aching from the effort. No one spoke to me unless they had to. I was an ornament, a decoration, in white. When the evening finally ended and the last guest departed, Aguero disappeared into the west wing of the mansion without a word. I stood in the foyer, still in my wedding dress, watching him go. A maid approached timidly. "Señora Salazar, your quarters are this way." My quarters, not ours. She led me to the east wing, to a suite of rooms as beautiful as they were empty. Silk drapes, a canopy bed, a balcony overlooking manicured gardens. Everything a bride would want. Except a husband. I didn't cry that night. I was too numb for tears. The days that followed blurred into a suffocating routine. Aguero left before dawn, returning long after I'd gone to bed. When our paths crossed in hallways or doorways, he'd nod, barely, and keep moving. We ate breakfast in the same dining room at different times. We lived under the same roof, but existed in separate universes. I tried once, 3 days in, to speak to him. He'd been in his study, door half open, reviewing documents. I knocked softly. "What?" His voice was sharp, impatient. "I thought maybe we could have dinner together tonight." He didn't look up. "I'm busy." "Tomorrow, then?" "Mabel." He finally glanced at me, his dark eyes cold and dismissive. "This isn't that kind of marriage. You have everything you need. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I left before he could see my hands shaking. After that, I stopped trying. I filled my days with nothing. I walked the gardens, I read books I didn't absorb. I smiled at the staff who pitied me with their eyes. At night, I lay in that enormous bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long a person could live like this before they stopped being a person at all. Silence, I learned, wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a presence, a weight, a slow erasure. Aguero's words could have hurt me, his anger could have broken me, but his indifference, his complete and utter disregard, that was destroying me in ways I didn't have language for. I was a ghost haunting my own life, and the man whose name I now carried didn't even notice I was fading. What I didn't understand yet, what neither of us could see, was that silence doesn't just destroy. Sometimes it teaches you to survive in the dark, and when the time comes, when the world demands you speak, you roar. I first noticed the guards on day 9. I'd gone into the city with the driver Aguero had assigned me, intending to visit the small bookshop near Praça de República, where I used to spend Saturday afternoons before my life became this. The driver, a stone-faced man named Tiago, had been polite but firm when I'd asked him to wait outside. 2 minutes later, I glanced through the shop window and saw him on his phone, his expression tense. When I emerged with a bag of novels I wouldn't read, there were 2 more men. Dark suits, earpieces, positioned on opposite corners of the street. They weren't subtle. They weren't meant to be. "Who are they?" I asked Tiago as he opened the car door. "Security, señora." I didn't ask for security. "You don't have to." The answer chilled me more than it should have. After that, I started paying attention. The guards weren't just outside, they were everywhere. When I walked the gardens, there were always 2 men maintaining a 50-foot perimeter. When I sat by the fountain with my coffee, I'd catch glimpses of figures between the hedges. Once I tested it. I took a different path through the estate's orchard, deliberately wandering off the usual route. Within minutes, my phone buzzed, Aguero's name on the screen. "Stay on the main paths." That was all. No explanation. He hung up before I could respond. I should have felt protected. Instead, I felt watched, studied, like a specimen under glass. Then there were the rooms. The Salazar estate had 3 floors and more doors than I'd bothered to count, but certain ones were always locked. The north study, the archive room on the 2nd floor, the entire basement level. I asked a maid once, casually, what was kept down there. She'd paled. "Storage, señora, nothing that concerns you." But I'd seen men coming and going from those locked doors at odd hours. I'd heard raised voices through thick wood, snippets of conversation in Portuguese and Spanish that stopped abruptly when I approached. Whatever Aguero kept behind those doors wasn't storage. It was the heart of his empire, and I wasn't allowed anywhere near it. What disturbed me most, though, was Aguero himself. He still barely spoke to me, still disappeared for days into his work, but I began catching him watching me. Not obviously, never directly, but I'd feel eyes on me during dinner, and when I'd glance up, he'd be staring from across the table before looking away. Once, I'd been reading in the library when I sensed a presence. I turned to find him in the doorway, motionless, his expression unreadable. The moment our eyes met, he walked away. It happened again and again, in hallways, across the courtyard, through windows. He was monitoring me, tracking my movements. But why? The question consumed me until one night, unable to sleep, I found him in his study at 2 a.m. The door was cracked open and I could see him at his desk, surrounded by files and photographs. I was about to retreat when I saw my face. My photograph clipped to a security report, multiple pages, red annotations. "Are you going to stand there all night?" His voice cut through the silence without him looking up. I pushed the door open. "What is that?" "Nothing that concerns you." "It's a file about me. That concerns me." Finally, he looked at me. His eyes were bloodshot, exhausted. For a moment, I thought I saw something crack in that cold facade, something raw and almost desperate. "Go to bed, Mabel. Not until you tell me why I'm being followed, why there are men watching me every second, why you're treating me like..." "Like what?" He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against marble. "Like you're in danger? Because you are." The words hung between us. "From who?" "From everyone who wants to hurt me." His jaw tightened. "Now go, before I change my mind about telling you even that much." I should have pushed harder, should have demanded answers, but something in his voice stopped me, something that sounded almost like fear. I left him there, surrounded by files and shadows, protecting me from threats I couldn't see, and for the first time, I wondered, what terrified him more, losing me or admitting he cared? The charity gala had been mind-numbingly dull. 3 hours of wealthy socialites discussing their vacation homes while servers circulated with champagne I didn't drink. I'd only attended because Aguero's associate, a politician named Rafael Ibarra, had specifically requested my presence. "Good optics," he'd said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The community needs to see the Salazar family cares." Aguero had approved it with a single text: "Tiago will drive you. Be back by 11. No, be safe, no, call me when you arrive, just logistics." I left at 10:30, my feet aching and heels I'd never broken in, my mind already on the hot bath waiting at home. Tiago opened the rear door of the black Mercedes, and I slid inside, grateful for the silence. We were 3 blocks from the estate when the night exploded. The first sound was glass shattering, the rear windshield disintegrating into 1,000 pieces. I screamed, throwing my arms over my head as Tiago shouted something I couldn't hear over the second gunshot, the third, the fourth. The car swerved violently. My body slammed against the door, pain erupting in my shoulder. "Get down!" Tiago's voice, raw with panic. I was already down, curled on the floor, my hands pressed over my ears as the world became nothing but noise and terror. More gunshots, the squeal of tires, Tiago cursing in Portuguese, the car accelerating so fast I felt my stomach lurch. Then, impact. Metal grinding against metal, the deafening crunch of collision. My head cracked against something hard, and the world went white, then red, then black. I woke to voices shouting, hands pulling at me, someone screaming my name. "Mabel! Mabel!" Aguero. My eyes wouldn't focus. Everything was blurred, doubled. I tried to speak, but my mouth tasted like copper. Blood. My blood. "Stay with me. Do you hear me? Stay with me." His voice was shattered, desperate, nothing like the cold, controlled man I'd married. Strong arms lifted me. I felt myself being carried, felt the night air on my face. Blue and red lights flashed somewhere in my peripheral vision. Sirens wailed. "Aguero," I managed to whisper. "I'm here. I'm right here." Then darkness again. When I surfaced the second time, I was in a hospital room flooded with harsh fluorescent light. My head pounded. My left arm was bandaged, immobilized. An IV drip fed into my right hand. And Aguero sat beside my bed, his face in his hands. I'd never seen him like this. His suit jacket was gone, his white shirt stained with something dark. Blood, I realized distantly. Mine or Tiago's, I didn't know. His hair, always perfectly styled, fell across his forehead in disarray. His shoulders shook. Aguero? His head snapped up. For 3 seconds, we just stared at each other. Then I saw it. The mask, the one he'd worn since the day we met, was gone, completely obliterated. What remained was raw terror. His eyes were red-rimmed, wet. His jaw trembled as he reached for my hand, gripping it so tightly it almost hurt. "I thought," his words broke, "I thought I'd lost you." I couldn't process the words, couldn't reconcile this broken man with the one who'd treated me like furniture for weeks. "Tiago?" I whispered. "Alive. Surgery. He'll recover." Aguero's thumb traced circles on the back of my hand, the gesture unconscious, desperate. "It was the Ochoa cartel. They targeted you to get to me." "Why?" "Because they knew." His other hand came up, cradling my face with a gentleness I didn't know he possessed. "They knew you were the only thing that could break me." Tears slid down my cheeks. "You said you didn't want me." I lied. The words came out strangled, agonized. "I've been lying since the moment you saw me. I pushed you away because wanting you made me vulnerable. In my world, vulnerability gets you killed. I thought if I kept my distance, if I made you invisible to my enemies, you'd be safe. I almost died anyway." "I know." He pressed his forehead against mine, his breath ragged. "And I realized something when they were pulling you from that car. I'd rather have you hate me and be alive than love me and be dead. But Abel," his voice dropped to a whisper, "I can't lose you. I won't survive it." For the first time since our wedding, I saw the truth. Aguero Salazar didn't fear his enemies. He feared how much he needed me. He didn't leave my hospital room for 3 days. The doctors tried to make him. His men called constantly with urgent matters that apparently couldn't wait. But Aguero remained in that uncomfortable chair beside my bed, his hand wrapped around mine, refusing to let go even when I slept. On the third night, when the pain medication had worn off enough for me to think clearly, I finally asked the question that had been building since the ambush. "Why did you marry me if you knew this would happen?" Aguero was silent for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he exhaled slowly, his grip on my hand tightening. "My father used to say that love was the only thing more dangerous than a bullet. He loved my mother so completely that when she died, it destroyed him. Not quickly, slowly. He made reckless decisions, trusted the wrong people, stopped caring whether he lived or died. Within 2 years, his enemies had dismantled everything he'd built." I watched his profile in the dim light filtering through the window blinds. He looked older somehow, worn down by truths he'd been carrying alone. "I was 16 when I took over what was left of his empire," he continued, "and I swore I'd never make his mistake. I'd never give anyone that kind of power over me. So I built walls. I became exactly what everyone expected. Cold, ruthless, untouchable. It worked. For years, it worked. Then I met you." The words were so quiet I almost missed them. "At your father's estate, 6 months before the marriage contract. You were in the garden, reading. You didn't even notice me standing there. And I remember thinking I'd never seen anything more beautiful. Not just your face, the way you existed in that moment, completely at peace, like the violence of my world couldn't touch you." My heart hammered against my ribs. I wanted you immediately, completely, and it terrified me, because I knew what wanting something that much meant. I knew what my enemies would do if they realized. They'd use you to break me, just like they did to my father. So when your father proposed the alliance, I agreed, but only if I could keep you at a distance, if I could make everyone believe you meant nothing. You made me believe it too, I whispered. I know. The anguish in his voice was visceral, and every day I watched you fade a little more. I watched the light in your eyes dim. I did that to you, Mabel. I broke you trying to protect you. The guards, the surveillance, you watching me constantly. I was trying to keep you safe without admitting why it mattered so much. He brought my hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to my knuckles. But distance doesn't work against determined enemies. They found your vulnerability anyway, and I realized I'd wasted weeks I could have spent actually knowing you, talking to you, letting you in, because I was too afraid to admit the truth. What truth? That I fell in love with you before we ever spoke, that every moment since has been me trying to survive wanting you, that pushing you away didn't protect either of us, it just made us both miserable. Tears streamed down my cheeks. All those silent dinners, all those empty nights, all that pain, not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much and didn't know how to survive it. The walls I built to keep you safe became a prison, he hoarsely said, and the cruelest part, I locked us both inside.
I pulled him closer with my good arm, my fingers threading through his hair. Then tear them down. What if something happens to you? What if... Something already happened to me, Aguero. I survived. We survived. I forced him to meet my eyes. You can't control everything. You can't prevent every threat. All you can do is decide whether you're going to waste what time we have being afraid or actually live. He pressed his face against my shoulder, and I felt his body shake with silent sobs. This man who commanded empires, reduced to pieces by the simple act of letting someone in. I don't know how to do this, he admitted against my neck. Neither do I. I held him tighter. But we'll figure it out. Together. The walls didn't come down all at once, but that night, in that hospital room, we started dismantling them brick by brick. I was released from the hospital on a Tuesday, and by Wednesday morning I was standing outside the locked basement door with my arms crossed. Aguero found me there 20 minutes later, his expression caught between amusement and concern. "What are you doing?" "Waiting for you to open this door." "Mabel." "No," I cut him off, my voice steady, despite the lingering ache in my shoulder. "You said you pushed me away to keep me safe. It didn't work. They still came for me. So now we try something different." "Which is?" "You stop hiding things from me. You stop treating me like fragile glass that needs to be kept in a display case. You teach me." His jaw tightened. "This isn't your world." "It became my world the moment I married you." I stepped closer, refusing to back down. "They targeted me because I'm your wife, because I'm connected to you. That doesn't change whether or not I understand what you do. The only thing that changes is whether I'm helpless when they come again. And they will come again, Aguero. We both know it." Something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. He unlocked the door. The basement was nothing like I'd imagined. No weapons, cache, no torture chamber from a crime movie. Instead, it was an operations center. Banks of monitors showing security feeds, large tables covered in maps and documents, filing cabinets lining the walls. This was where Aguero ran his empire. "If you're going to be part of this," he said quietly, "you need to understand what this actually is." He started slowly, teaching me the organizational structure first, the legitimate businesses that served as fronts, the network of allies and subordinates, the delicate balance of power that kept everything functioning. Then the darker parts, the protection rackets, the smuggling routes, the politicians and police commanders on his payroll. I absorbed it all like oxygen.
Aguero had expected shock, maybe disgust. Instead, I asked questions, pointed out vulnerabilities in his supply chains, suggested alternative strategies for dealing with resistant business owners. "Where did you learn to think like this?" he asked after I outlined a more efficient distribution system. "My father ran a shipping company for 30 years. You think I didn't pay attention?" I traced a route on the map. "You're moving product through here, but the dock inspectors rotate every Tuesday. If you shifted the schedule by 6 hours, it would bypass Rodriguez entirely." Aguero stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "That's actually brilliant." After that, he brought me to meetings. Not all of them yet, but enough. I sat quietly at first, listening to his commanders argue over territory disputes and supply issues. Ramiro was skeptical of my presence, his glances making that clear. The others simply ignored me. Until the day Antonio Vega proposed expanding into the North Docks. "Too much heat," he argued, "but the profit margins would be irrelevant if you end up in prison," I said. The room went silent. 6 men turned to stare at me. "The federal task force has been surveilling the North Docks for 3 months," I continued, pulling out my phone to show them the news article I'd found that morning. "They're building a case. You move in now, you're walking into a trap." Antonio's face reddened. "And you know this how?" "Because I read, because I pay attention, because I'm not arrogant enough to think I know everything." I looked at Aguero. "The South Docks are cleaner, less profit, but sustainable. Sometimes the smartest move isn't the boldest one." Aguero leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at his lips. "The South Docks it is." After the meeting, Ramiro pulled Aguero aside. I heard fragments of their conversation through the door. "She's sharp, Jefe. Sharper than Antonio, that's for sure." "I know. You're going to keep bringing her to these meetings?" "If she wants to come." Aguero's voice carried a note of pride. "She sees things we miss, angles we don't consider. She's been living in a different world than us, one where you can't just intimidate people into compliance. She's had to be strategic her whole life." That night, Aguero took me to his actual office, not the public one, but the private study where he kept his most sensitive files. "You were right," he said, unlocking a drawer. "Power isn't given. My father tried to hand me his empire, but I had to earn every man's respect, win every territory, prove myself worthy." He handed me a file. "You're not my weakness, Mabel. You're becoming my greatest asset." I opened the folder. Inside were dossiers on the Ochoa cartel leadership. "Then let's finish what they started." His smile was sharp, dangerous, and for the first time it felt like we were truly partners. The attack came during what should have been a routine meeting. Aguero had been negotiating with a shipping contractor at a warehouse in Brooklyn, neutral territory, public enough to be safe. I'd wanted to come, but he'd insisted I stay home. "Just business," he'd said, kissing my forehead. "I'll be back for dinner." That was at 2 in the afternoon. At 4:17, Ramiro's call shattered everything. "Mabel." His voice was raw, panicked, a tone I'd never heard from Ramiro. "There's been an incident." The phone nearly slipped from my hands. What kind of incident? The warehouse was a setup. Ochoa had men inside. Rafael Ibarra gave them the location. He paused, and I heard sirens in the background. "Aguero's been shot." The world tilted. How bad? "Bad. They're taking him to Hospital Syrio-Libanese." "Mabel." His voice cracked. "You need to get here now." Tiago drove like we were being chased, weaving through Sao Paulo traffic with the kind of recklessness that should have terrified me. I barely noticed. My mind was stuck on a loop. Aguero's been shot. Aguero's been shot. The hospital was chaos when we arrived. Armed men filled the emergency wing, Aguero's security detail, their faces grim.
Romero met me at the entrance, his suit jacket torn, blood splattered across his shirt. Where is he? Surgery. They won't tell us anything yet. He ran his hair through his hair, his composure fractured. It was an ambush, Mabel. Coordinated, professional. They had Ibarra feed us the location, knew exactly when we'd arrive. Ochoa's men were waiting inside. 8 of them. How many did we lose? 3 dead, 5 wounded. Aguero took 2 bullets before we could get him out. 1 in the shoulder, 1 in the chest. The chest wound, they said, it's close to his heart. I forced myself to breathe, forced myself to think past the terror clawing at my throat. Have you secured the estate? He blinked, surprised by the question. What? The estate, Romero. Have you locked it down? Increased security? Because if Ochoa was willing to do this, they're not stopping here. They know Aguero's vulnerable right now. Yes, I sent additional men an hour ago. Good. What about our other operations? Mabel, I don't think... Answer the question. My voice was sharper than I intended, but I couldn't afford softness right now. What about our supply lines, our distribution points, our contacts? Have you checked in with everyone? Romero stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Behind him, I could see other members of Aguero's inner circle watching. Antonio, Luis, Javier, all of them looking lost, waiting for someone to tell them what to do. No, Romero admitted, we've been focused on Aguero, I understand, but our enemies aren't waiting. They smell blood, and they're going to move fast. We need to be faster. What are you saying? I'm saying we need to show them that taking down Aguero doesn't mean taking down his empire. I looked at each man in turn. Where's the nearest secure location we can use as a command center? There's a conference room on the 3rd floor, Luis offered hesitantly. Hospital staff gave us access. Then that's where we're going. Romero, I need you to contact every commander, every lieutenant, everyone who answers to Aguero.
I processed it all, made decisions, gave orders. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I was terrified, but I couldn't afford to show it. Leadership, I was learning, wasn't about having all the answers. It was about refusing to let fear make your decisions. 3 hours later, a surgeon finally found us. His scrubs were still stained, his expression carefully neutral. Mrs. Salazar? I stood, my heart in my throat. How is he? He's alive. The surgery was successful, but the next 48 hours are critical. Alive. The word crashed through me like a wave. Behind me, I heard Romero exhale shakily. The others murmured prayers, relief palpable in the room. Can I see him? Not yet, but soon. The surgeon left, and the room erupted in conversation. Plans to retaliate against Ochoa's known locations, strategies to hunt down the Barra, proposals for striking back at Ochoa. I let them talk while I walked to the window, pressing my forehead against the cool glass. Aguero was alive, but his empire had been tested, and somehow, impossibly, I'd held it together. Not because I was strong, but because I'd had no choice but to become what the moment demanded. I was allowed to see Aguero at midnight. He lay motionless in the ICU, tubes and wires connecting him to machines that beeped steadily in the darkness. His face was pale, his breathing shallow but stable. I took his hand carefully, mindful of the IV lines, and pressed my lips to his knuckles. I need you to stay alive, because what I'm about to do is either going to save us or get us both killed, and I'd really prefer to have you around to tell me which one it is. His fingers didn't move, but the heart monitor maintained its steady rhythm. That would have to be enough. I returned to the makeshift war room at 12:30 to find chaos barely contained. Voices overlapped, arguments escalating. Antonio wanted immediate retaliation against Ochoa's known locations. Luis advocated pulling back, consolidating defenses.
Javier was on the phone trying to prevent 3 allied families from withdrawing their support. I walked to the head of the table and slammed my palm down hard enough to rattle the coffee cups. Silence fell like a guillotine. "Sit down," I said quietly, "all of you." They sat. "We have 2 enemies right now," I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Ochoa's cartel and Rafael Ibarra. They're working together, which means we need to break that alliance before we can destroy either of them." "We don't have the resources," Antonio started. "We don't need resources. We need leverage." I pulled out my phone, displaying the photograph I'd had one of our tech people dig up 3 hours ago. Rafael Ibarra's accountant has a gambling problem and a very understanding mistress who happens to owe her brother's life to one of our doctors. I smiled without humor. Turns out, people are surprisingly helpful when you frame things correctly. I pulled up another file. Rafael's political career survives on his reputation as a reformer, the man who cleans up corruption. If this information reaches the federal prosecutor's office by morning, along with the evidence that he facilitated an attempted murder in exchange for cartel money, his career doesn't just end, he goes to prison. "You want to burn him," Luis said slowly. "I want to destroy him so completely that Ochoa realizes partnering with politicians makes them vulnerable, not strong." I turned to Javier. "Can you get this to Prosecutor Mendez by dawn? Mendez owes us 3 favors. Consider it done." "Good. That handles Rafael." I spread a map across the table, marking 3 locations in red. Now for Ochoa. They're expecting retaliation, something loud, violent, predictable, so we're going to do the opposite. I pointed to the first location. This is Ochoa's primary cocaine processing facility. It's also completely dependent on a single water treatment system that, according to municipal records, hasn't been inspected in 4 years and is one anonymous tip away from being shut down by environmental regulators. Antonio's eyes widened. "You want to use bureaucracy as a weapon?" "I want to cripple their production without firing a single shot. While they're scrambling to relocate operations and dealing with federal investigators, we hit their secondary distribution network." I indicated the second location. "This warehouse processes their entire northern supply chain, except it's about to have a catastrophic electrical fire. Very tragic, no casualties, but the damage will take 3 months minimum to repair." "And the third?" Romero asked, something like admiration creeping into his voice. "The third is Ochoa's money, specifically the accounts he uses to pay his men." I pulled up a spreadsheet. His financial network routes through 4 banks. 3 of those banks have compliance officers we've worked with. 1 phone call from each flagging suspicious transactions for federal review, and his accounts freeze. Suddenly, Ochoa can't make payroll. The room had gone completely silent. "Let me be clear about what happens next," I continued, my voice dropping. "By morning, Rafael Ibarra will be in handcuffs, his face plastered across all news channels. By noon, Ochoa's warehouse will be in ashes while environmental regulators seal his processing facility. By evening, reports come in of Ochoa's men abandoning their posts, angry and unpaid. And when Aguero finally opened his eyes 36 hours later, the first thing he saw was me sitting beside his hospital bed, exhausted but not unbroken. "What did I miss?" he rasped. I smiled. "Just me saving your empire." His laugh was weak but genuine. "My queen." "Your partner," I corrected, squeezing his hand. "Yes," he agreed. "My partner." The most dangerous opponent, I learned, wasn't the one with the most weapons. It was the one no one saw coming. Aguero's recovery was slow, painful, and humbling. For a man who'd built an empire on appearing invincible, being confined to a hospital bed while his wife ran his organization was a special kind of torture. But he endured it with surprising grace, listening intently as I briefed him each evening on the day's developments.
Rafael Ibarra pled guilty this morning, I told him on day 5, settling into the chair that had become my second home. 15 years, no possibility of parole. And Ochoa? His cartel is fracturing. 3 of his top commanders defected to the Vargas family yesterday. 2 more are negotiating terms with us. I pulled out my tablet, showing him the updated territory map. We've absorbed most of his northern operations without firing a shot. Aguero studied the map, then studied me, something unreadable in his dark eyes. You did in 1 week what would have taken me months of bloodshed. Different approaches for different problems, I said softly. You taught me that. No, he reached for my hand, his grip still weak but determined. You taught me that. I was so focused on being feared that I forgot there are other ways to wield power. He was released from the hospital 3 weeks after the shooting, against his doctor's advice and with strict bed rest orders. The estate had been transformed in his absence, security doubled, new protocols implemented, the command center in the basement expanded and modernized. You've been busy, he observed as I helped him up the stairs, his arm draped carefully over my shoulder. I had motivation. That night, for the first time since our wedding, Aguero came to my room, not to the guest suite he'd been using, but to the bedroom we'd been assigned as husband and wife, but had never shared. He stood in the doorway, uncertain in a way I'd never seen him. Can I stay? The question was so simple, so vulnerable, that it nearly broke me. This is your home too, I said. You never had to ask. He crossed to the bed slowly, his movements still pained, and sat beside me. For a long moment, we just existed in the same space, breathing the same air. I was wrong about everything, he finally said. About what strength means, about what keeps us safe, about you. He turned to face me fully. You weren't my weakness, Mabel. You were my salvation, and I was too terrified to see it. I took his hand, threading my fingers through his. We were both terrified, both trying to survive in the only ways we knew how. And now?
Now we survive together, as partners, as equals. I leaned my head against his shoulder carefully, mindful of his injuries. No more walls, no more distance, no more walls, he echoed, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. The empire stabilized over the following months, but it looked different now, less brutal, more strategic. We ruled together, Aguero handling the traditional operations he knew best, me managing the political relationships and long-term planning. His men, who'd once dismissed me, now sought my input as readily as his. Romero joked that I was scarier than Aguero because people never saw my attacks coming. I took it as a compliment. 4 months after the shooting, I discovered I was pregnant. Aguero cried when I told him, actual tears streaming down his face as he pulled me into his arms and held me like I might disappear. A son, he whispered against my hair. Or a daughter, I don't care, as long as they have your strength. And your heart, I replied, the one you finally let me see. Our son was born on a rainy Tuesday in October, screaming his way into the world with impressive lungs and his father's dark eyes. Aguero held him with shaking hands, this man who commanded armies rendered helpless by 7 pounds of newborn. Mateo, he said softly, testing the name we'd chosen. After my father, but he'll be better than either of us, because he'll grow up knowing that love isn't weakness. I watched them together, my husband and our son, and felt something settle deep in my chest. Peace, maybe, or purpose. We'd built something that transcended the violence of our beginning. An empire, yes, but also a family, a partnership, a love that had survived rejection, bullets, and betrayal. That night, standing on our bedroom balcony with Mateo sleeping peacefully in his bassinet and Aguero's arms wrapped around me from behind, I finally understood what true power looked like. It wasn't fear. It wasn't control. It was this: choosing to be vulnerable with someone and trusting them not to destroy you. It was transforming pain into purpose, rejection into resilience. "Do you remember what you said the night before our wedding?" Aguero murmured against my ear. "That you never wanted this?" "I remember." "Do you still feel that way?" I turned in his arms, meeting his gaze directly. I never wanted a loveless contract, a cold arrangement, a life lived in silence and fear. I touched his face gently. "But this, us, what we've become, I wouldn't trade it for anything." He kissed me softly, reverently, like I was something precious he'd almost lost. "I was wrong that night," he whispered against my ear. "I told them I never wanted you. But the truth is, I wanted you so desperately it terrified me, and I've spent every day since trying to become the man who deserves you. You already are, because you let me save you, and you let yourself be saved." Inside, our son made a small sound. Aguero smiled, that genuine smile I'd worked so hard to earn, and went to check on him. I stayed on the balcony a moment longer, looking out over the city we controlled together. The girl who'd overheard her rejection didn't exist anymore. She'd been forged into something stronger, fiercer, more unbreakable. Not despite the pain, but because of it. And the man who'd pushed her away had learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the person you reject becomes the only one who can save you, not by being weak, but by refusing to let weakness define them.